Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this news bulletin with our top story, and that's in Pakistan, where Army spokesperson Major General Asif Ghafoor says the wording used in the court verdict against former President Pervez Musharraf is inhumane. In a press conference, he said the country comes before institutions. He added that the army knows how to defend the integrity of its institution and no one is allowed to spread anarchy in the country. He said important decisions were taken during a detailed discussion between Army Chief Qamar Javed Bajwa and Prime Minister Imran Khan. Earlier, the court ordered if Musharraf is found dead, his corpse be dragged to Islamabad's D Chowk and be hanged for 3 days. He was sentenced to death after being found guilty of subverting the constitution in November 2007. Musharraf is currently in Dubai for medical treatment. Meanwhile, Pakistan's army says it will respond to any Indian misadventure along the line of control. Earlier, the Indian Army Chief Bipin Rawat said the situation along the LOC could escalate at any time. Military spokesman General Asif Ghafoor said Indian Army Chief's provocative statement is an effort to divert the world's attention from citizenship law protests. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India has partially removed the fence on the LOC in 5 sectors. In a letter to the UN Security Council, he said India has deployed BrahMos anti-tank guided and Spike missiles for use across the LOC. Well, in India, police shoot dead 3 people as violent protests against the citizenship law continue across the country. 2 people were killed in southern Karnataka province and 1 other in the northern city of Lucknow. This brings the death toll from the violence to 9 since Parliament passed the citizenship bill on the 10th of December. Protesters are demanding the government repeal the legislation that grants nationality to only non-Muslim immigrants. Meanwhile, police detain thousands across the country for defying a ban on protests. Prominent historian Ramachandra Guha has also been arrested. Authorities have also suspended mobile network and internet services in parts of New Delhi and Uttar Pradesh. US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says Washington is approaching an important phase of the Afghan peace process. Khalilzad made the statement after completing a visit to Kabul and meeting the country's leaders. The envoy has called his 2-day Kabul consultation a productive trip. He said the parties discussed ways of reducing violence and opening dialogue. Khalilzad also met the US ambassador in Kabul, John Bass, and the US and NATO forces commander in Afghanistan, General Austin Scott Miller. In Syria, government airstrikes kill 3 civilians and wound 20 others in northwestern Idlib. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the strikes targeted residential areas. Idlib is the last major rebel-held bastion in Syria after 8 years of war. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said 50,000 Syrians are heading to their way to Turkey to flee violence in Idlib. Turkey currently holds over 3 million Syrian refugees, the largest refugee population in the world. Well, President Tayyip Erdogan said the fate of the world's Muslims is no longer in the hands of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Speaking at the Kuala Lumpur summit, Erdogan said the world is bigger than the 5 veto power states. He said despite attempts to silence Turkey, Ankara insists on calling attention to Palestine, the Rohingya, Libya, Somalia and Syria. Also speaking at the summit was Iran's President Hassan Rouhani, who condemned the US for threatening sanctions on other countries. Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad said the Muslim world is passing through a state of crisis and the summit may find solutions to these challenges. Well, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says his country has no plans to create a military alliance with China. Speaking in Moscow, Putin said Russia is helping China build a missile attack warning system as a defensive measure. Talking about arms control treaty with the US, Putin says Russia is ready to agree a new deal on the START treaty. Putin said the new deal is necessary to control the arms race in the world. The new START treaty is the last remaining arms control accord between Moscow and Washington, and it's due to expire in 2021. Commenting on US President Trump's impeachment, Putin said the impeachment was based on made-up reasons. China and Japan have both agreed to work on North Korea's denuclearization. While tensions grow between Washington and Pyongyang, the understanding was reached after a meeting between Japanese Defense Minister Taro Kono and his Chinese counterpart General Wei Fengzhou in Beijing. The two sides discussed the importance of fulfilling UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea. Expressing a desire to increase mutual trust, Kono said that there are still concerns between the two countries, including the East China Sea. Tokyo and Beijing also decided on strengthening communication with each other. This is the first visit by a Japanese defense chief to China since 2009. Now moving on to the US Congress, which has decided to impose extra sanctions on banks and companies dealing with North Korea. The sanctions bill is named after Otto Warmbier, an American student who died in the US after being detained in North Korea for over a year. The bill lists mandatory sanctions on North Korean textile imports and exports of coal and other minerals. Yesterday, a bipartisan group of US senators warned Pyongyang of further economic embargoes in response to any provocations. Earlier, China and Russia proposed a draft UN resolution calling for some sanctions against North Korea to be lifted. Thousands of people have come out in favor and against the impeachment of US President Donald Trump. Demonstrators gathered in Michigan to condemn the impeachment, while its supporters staged rallies in Colorado, California, and Arizona. Trump supporters lined up for hours ahead of his Michigan campaign rally. Protesters branded the probe shameful, saying the president had committed no crime. Anti-Trump rallies, however, in Oakland, Denver, and San Francisco welcomed the constitutional process taken up by House Democrats. In Great Britain, the Queen has set out the Conservative government's agenda for the year ahead, following last week's decisive election win. Legislation to take the UK out of the EU on 31st of January was among more than 30 bills announced. This included bills related to trade, immigration and agriculture. The Queen said her government was prioritising delivering Brexit by the 31st of January. Other plans included increased funding for schools and the NHS and measures to improve internet safety. The Brexit bill is set to come back before MPs on Friday. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he wants to unite the country and level up opportunity. In Spain, Catalonia's highest court has sentenced the region's leader Quim Torra to an 18-month ban on holding public office. Torra was found guilty of disobedience after he failed to obey an order to remove separatist propaganda from public offices during election campaigning. The court also imposed a fine on Torra of over $33,000. The ruling will only come into effect if it's confirmed by Spain's Supreme Court, which could take several months. While staying in Spain, thousands of pro-independence protesters took to the streets of Barcelona during a football match between Barca and Real Madrid. 46 demonstrators were injured and 5 others arrested in clashes with the police. Thousands of fans inside the stadium held up banners urging the government to hold talks with Catalan separatists. More protesters gathered outside the stadium, chanting independence and calling for people they described as political prisoners to be freed. The match was postponed in October over protests against the conviction of 9 Catalan separatist leaders. A court in the Philippines has found the senior members of a political clan guilty of masterminding the 2009 massacre of 57 people. Members of 3 generations of the influential Amputuan family were among those sentenced to life imprisonment on multiple counts of murder. Over 28 people received the maximum penalty of life imprisonment. The Amputuan family is a dynasty in the southern province of Mindanao. They had also been accused of conspiring to ambush the convoy of a rival clan. Among the casualties were the wife and relatives of a rival candidate, lawyers and 32 journalists. The brazen attack was the country's single worst case of election violence. Well, we'll be back with more news right after this short break. Hello again, it's good to have you back. Now, Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Saad Hariri has announced he will no longer pursue the top job. In a statement, Mr. Hariri said he will be involved in selecting a new Prime Minister despite his withdrawal. It remains unclear who will be the new Prime Minister with Hariri's future movement. Parliamentary bloc set to meet later this morning, and any Prime Minister involved in it must be approved by them by a majority of the 128 Member of Parliament. Hariri made his announcement 50 days after resigning the post against a background of massive protests against the ruling elite. Bolivia's prosecutors have issued an arrest warrant for exiled ex-president Evo Morales on sedition and terrorism charges. The interim government claims Morales promoted violent clashes that led to 35 deaths before and after he left office. Police have confirmed the warrant. Last month, Interior Minister Arturo Murillo filed a criminal complaint against the former socialist leader. The case against Morales centers on a video where he is allegedly directing a Bolivian man to plane roadblocks.
It's not possible that Mr. Evo Morales, after the people believed in him so much, orders his people to be killed, orders that food shouldn't enter the cities. This is a crime against humanity.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has criticized member states for violating a UN-imposed arms embargo on Libya. Guterres described Libya's situation as similar to cancer, spreading instability and conflicts in several parts of Africa. He said it's frustrating that the Security Council embargo and requests for a ceasefire are not being respected. Guterres said several member states are providing weapons to both sides of the conflict every week. Conflicts, climate change and weak economic growth are leaving more people without enough to eat. The United Nations says 168 million people will need food, shelter or healthcare in 2020. The world body needs $29 billion to help provide help. More in this report.
New evidence shows the number of people suffering from malnutrition is growing. According to a UN report, a record number of 168 million people will be in need of food, shelter or healthcare assistance in 2020. The UN Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs says this is the highest number ever registered since the Second World War. He adds the UN needs $29 billion to provide this aid.
In 2020, nearly 168 million people will need humanitarian assistance and protection. That represents about 1 person in 45 in the planet. It is the highest figure for decades. The situation is going to keep getting worse unless climate change and the root causes of conflict are better addressed.
Meanwhile, climate change is affecting rainfall patterns and agricultural seasons. Droughts and floods, together with conflicts and economic slowdowns, are key drivers behind malnutrition. Diseases are also on the rise in the most climate-affected region.
Climate change is increasing people's vulnerability to humanitarian crisis. 13 of the 20 countries most vulnerable to climate change are places in which we have an interagency appeal. Infectious diseases are becoming more prevalent and harder to control because of weak health systems and conflict and lack of access to immunization. In fact, in Africa, in the first 3 months of this year, there were 700% more measles cases than in the same period last year.
Meanwhile, conflicts are directly driving up women and children's mortality and morbidity.
We have also again this year seen a decline in compliance with international humanitarian law. Armed conflicts are killing and maiming a record number of children. More than 12,000 children, in fact, were killed or maimed in conflict in 2018, and 2019 has been worse.
The UN warns if nothing is done to tackle this developing disaster, over 200 million people could be in need of assistance in 2022.
The Global Alliance on Health and Pollution says India led the world in pollution-linked deaths in 2017, followed by China and Nigeria. In a report, the body found pollution to be the largest environmental cause of premature death on the planet, claiming 8 million lives. In 2017, India and China suffered 2.3 million and 1.8 million deaths respectively. The report says India has seen increasing industrial pollution, with bad sanitation and contaminated indoor air a factor in poor communities. It's divided risk factors into air, water, occupational and lead. The agency said pollution is a global crisis which worsens every day. At the U.S. border in Ciudad Juarez, Mexican asylum seekers are fighting freezing temperature while they wait for their immigration court hearings. Many worry about their young children getting sick. Mexican officials, concerned about the health of the migrants, are trying to move them to safer shelters. This report has more.
In recent months, Ciudad Juarez has been crowded with Mexican immigrants seeking asylum in the U.S. The waiting list includes 1,200 people, of which 550 are staying in camps, combating freezing temperatures through the weekend. Nearly half of these are children under the age of 12.
We are deciding right now whether we should go back because the cold is really bad and we have children with us that are getting sick, and we are disappointed because we haven't been able to cross.
Immigration advocates say President Donald Trump's entry policies are exposing vulnerable populations to crime and extortion.
The people need to know they can't be in these public spaces for the good of their sons and daughters who are exposed to crime and above all the inclement weather.
Mexican officials are attempting to arrange a meeting with their US counterparts to discuss conditions in the camps. US Customs and Border Protection has not responded to those requests.
In Senegal, the increasing demand for cement is turning the country's protected baobab forests into a desolate landscape of abandoned craters. As the cement industry continues to exploit the subsoil, locals fear even more destruction. More about the catastrophe in this report.
This area used to be full of baobabs, an iconic tree in Senegal that represents life and death and whose leaves are used in medicinal teas. But today, the landscape here is lunar. These craters are the result of limestone mining in Bandia, an hour's drive from Dakar. For nearly 20 years, the Senegalese company Ciment du Sahel has based its cement plant here. The plant is supplied with limestone from some 20 open pit mines in the surrounding area.
As soon as they reach a part where there is no more limestone, they give up and leave it as it is. But in the contract it was clearly specified that after exploitation it is necessary to backfill, to restore and to put in new plant species, which would allow the baobabs to reclaim these areas.
With only 1/5 of the original forest area left, the cement plant has obtained a license to operate an additional 236 hectares. The decision is causing anger and concern among local residents. The explosives used would shake the surrounding houses, resulting in noxious limestone dust entering the atmosphere.
Since the mining began, there has been an increase in respiratory diseases. These include tuberculosis, asthma, respiratory infections such as pneumonia. It really affected the boys from the villages.
In Senegal, the construction sector is growing rapidly, driven by the government's policy of pursuing industrialization in this poor nation. One consequence is that it is now considered necessary to declassify once protected forest land.
When we make a decision to downgrade, we take the necessary measures to ensure that everything we lose in terms of forest is compensated for in another part of the territory. The state of Senegal has committed itself through the Emerging Senegal Plan to make Senegal green. I believe that is the intention of the head of state, the President of the Republic.
The authorities have assured that the authorization given to the cement plant is not final, and the licensing to operate across more land is pending. But with the current pace of cement production, the future of the region's baobab trees could be at risk.
In Afghanistan, decades of conflict have left the war-torn nation strewn with landmines and other deadly devices. Last year, 10 children from an Afghan family met with tragedy on their way to school. This is a short report on the family of amputees.
A tragedy no child should bear. 10 children from the same family were on the way to school when they picked up an unexploded motor bomb on the ground, a common enough sight in Afghanistan. The deadly device went off. 7 of them survived, but they lost at least 1 limb each. More than a year later, they are struggling to adapt.
The day when the blast took place, it was a bad day. I saw my brothers and sisters soaked in blood, lying on the ground. My entire family were destroyed.
The children are tutored at home, but sometimes they have to go to school for exams. It's not an easy journey. Blisters develop when their artificial limbs rub against their skin, a painful reminder of their new reality.
I feel very sad when I see other girls walk towards school and I cannot walk like them. War still rages on here.
War still rages on here, even though the Taliban are in negotiations with the US for some sort of peace settlement. A resolution still seems far off. Decades of conflict have left the nation strewn with landmines and other deadly devices. The UN says more than 900 children were killed in 2018. Another 7,000 were wounded. And though hers was taken away, Rabia hopes other children in Afghanistan can still enjoy a normal childhood.
Now, if you've not travelled to Pakistan before, maybe now's the right time, as Condé Nast, one of the world's best travel portals, has listed the country as one of the top tourist destinations for 2020. And to capitalise on that situation, authorities in Pakistan are injecting more money in the tourism sector. This report has more by Samira Khan.
Pakistan's efforts to promote tourism have started yielding results, thanks to an improved law and order situation. As the year draws to a close, many travel magazines and publications have released annual top countries lists for aspiring travelers looking for adventure in the upcoming year. One such publication, Condé Nast Traveler magazine, ranked Pakistan #1 in its 20 best places for tourism in the 2020 list. Local authorities are also working tirelessly to revive the industry.
Basic infrastructure needs to be there, and that is the responsibility of the government. So we have already allocated 5 billion rupees and the roads have been approved. It will start construction maybe in this month, in January, inshallah, hopefully. After the completion of these roads, it will be new destination, 14 new destinations, which we desperately needed. And the cost of it is 5 billion rupees.
Atif Khan appreciated Condé Nast's feedback on Pakistan. He recommended several relatively unknown spots in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa for curious travelers. These include Marghzar, Godar Lake and Bashigram.
Pakistan's law and order and security has improved a lot in the last couple of years, and hopefully it will be much better in the coming years. We are having a tourism police which will be on ground before this coming season.
Pakistan is home to over 100 peaks above 7,000 meters. 5 of the 14 highest peaks in the world, the 8,000ers, are in Pakistan. Previously, UK-based newspaper The Independent declared Pakistan the second best tourist destination for 2020. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Islamabad.
Beautiful. Now we'll be back with more news from business and sports right after this short break. Welcome back. Now in business news, Amazon, Apple and Google are partnering up to improve their compatibility of their smart home products. They've called the scheme Project Connected Home over IP. This report has more.
3 of the world's biggest tech companies, Apple, Amazon and Google, have put aside years of competition to create a joint technology standard. The new benchmark is aimed at smart home products like Amazon's Echo, Apple's HomePod and Google's Home. The businesses say they want to develop and promote a new royalty-free connectivity standard. They said it would increase compatibility among smart home products, with security as a fundamental feature.
The Bank of Japan has left its policy rate unchanged and maintained its upbeat view on the economy. In a statement, the bank said Japan's economy expanded 2% year-on-year in the third quarter, driven by resilient domestic demand. It revised down its industrial production outlook, saying output is falling due to soft global demand and the trade war between China and the US. The economic advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Koichi Hamada, criticized the negative policy rate and warned against pushing borrowing costs to a reversal rate. Now in the market, stock markets across Europe are trading fractionally lower amid a lack of stimulus. Investors are closely monitoring economic data and key interest rate decisions from central banks. Frankfurt's DAX is trading 0.5% lower as Hugo Boss fell 4% after Deutsche Bank downgraded the stock. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading fractionally lower. London's FTSE 100 is largely flat ahead of a key policy rate announcement by the Bank of England. In Asia, Hong Kong Hang Seng closed 1% lower as shares of index heavyweight Tencent dropped over 1%. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 also traded fractionally lower as Family Mart shares slid 2%. Seoul's Kospi gained marginally when SK Hynix stocks surged 2% on the back of Micron posting a first quarter beat on the top and bottom line. Well, it's 11 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. And don't forget, for the latest updates on all of our stories, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Bye-bye.